We're here with Eli from Eli's Honeybees,
Eli's Honeybees.
the beekeeper.
Happy to be here.
Now, I'll be honest with you, brother. I want to know why you become a beekeeper, because like I look at bees and I'm like, terrorists. They're the terrorists of the animal kingdom. And I think for this next hour 15, you're going to do a lot of convincing our viewers and stuff about like why bees are necessary.
Yeah, bees are definitely necessary, both for pollinating crops and also for producing delicious honey, which I actually brought some for you guys.
Oh my God, thanks, dude.
But also they're fascinating creatures. I'm not gonna lie. There's certain times when you have an entire beehive that you get it mad enough that it hasn't happened to me in a few years because I've gotten a little better at it over the years, where they're all trying to sting you and at those times I'd be inclined to be a little nervous around them. But just like I often compare bees to people, where like you see a person walking down the street, they're not going to run up and attack you. You see a dog walking down the street, it's not going to bite you. You break into somebody's house like you do when you're keeping bees. You open up a beehive.
Yeah. So there's no homeless bees in the bee kingdom.
Not honeybees. Honeybees all have hives and they'll sting to protect their hives.
Okay.
But they tend to be a lot more gentle than like, say, a bear would be protecting its den, or a person.
Sure, yeah.
So if you kind of compare it to that, they're actually not too scary. But I got into bees, to answer your actual question. I got into bees when I was 12 years old. I was homeschooled, and I went on a field trip, which a lot of my schooling being homeschooled was.
What if homeschoolers go to field trip to the backyard?
The same places that the school kids go on field trips. It's just that you go, there's 6 people instead of 40, and so you can get all those same like really cool field trips, but you don't have to like spend half your time trying to stay with your class. And
did you like being homeschooled?
For me, it worked great. I enjoyed it a lot. I had a large friend group of other homeschoolers, which I think was really important. And so it really let me pursue some of the things that I was interested in, which was kind of everything, and not get bogged down with like taking a bus here and there and then homeroom and all this other stuff.
Wake up, go down to the kitchen, or go to someone else's house and learn curriculum.
Yep. And so like that day, the field trip we went to historic Harriton House, put on bee suits and went through a beehive, which is probably more involved than you could do if you had a class of 40 children. You probably wouldn't be able to do something that involved, but, we were able to open up the hives, and I had tons of questions. I thought it was super cool. I was one of those kids that was just really into everything. And so when I got home, I was like, Mom, Dad, I'm having a bee. I want to keep bees. I want to be a beekeeper. And, the day before I wanted to be a buffalo farmer because there was a buffalo farmer at the farmer's market. And the day before that, I wanted to be a sailor. And the day before that, I wanted to be a firefighter. And, I'm a sailor, a firefighter, and a beekeeper now. I'm still working on the buffalo farming.
Oh, we'll get there one day. Dude. I brought you guys some bison, by the way.
Never stop dreaming, dude.
But so it's so I started my first hive the next year and was able to teach that field trip and others, and then every year I would shovel snow and mow lawns and do all the normal businesses that a kid can do to make extra money to buy beehives.
How do you start a hive?
So the way you start is you buy the equipment, so the actual hive boxes, and then you still got to assemble it, nail it together, things like that. And then you buy the bees in what's called a nucleus, which is 5 frames of bees, basically a miniature beehive. And then you put that into the big beehive, and they go out, they gather nectar from flowers and build up through the course of the year, and then you're off and running. And now I help other people do that.
So you're 12 years old, and you're able to go to your parents and say, I'm 12 years old, I'm going to buy 1,000 bees. And they were like, cool, let's see how this goes. Like, were they hesitant that there's a large scale operation like that?
I started with about 10,000.
Oh, Jesus. All right.
Which is one hive.
Okay.
One hive is 10,000 bees?
One hive to start is 10,000 bees. By midsummer is 80,000.
Oh my God.
Damn, what are bee, like, what's the, is it gestation period? Like, what's the period on that for like a pregnant bee?
So the queen can lay about 2,000 eggs a day, and then those eggs are going to take 2 to 3 weeks to hatch as adult bees. And so the queen's job in the hive, one of the queen's jobs is to increase and decrease the population by how many eggs she lays, with a mind to the future. So like right now, my hives are overwintering, so the queen isn't laying very many eggs because that's eggs you got to keep warm and feed, and there's no nectar to produce. But as soon as the early spring, 2 or 3 weeks before it gets warm, she needs to really start ramping up the egg production and lay 2,000 eggs a day so that we go into spring with really big, strong hives that we can then split and sell and produce honey and do all the things we do that actually, make money for the
Now,
business.
does she carry those 2,000 bees, or do they get like put into like a comb?
Yeah, so she'll lay each. So if you think about like honeycomb, it's like a bunch of little cells.
Yeah.
She'll lay one in each cell, and then the workers will come feed them and then do the rest of raising them. They'll emerge from the cell fully grown as like looking like an adult bee. And then they live in the summer. It might be only a month of just that bee will live. In the winter, they can overwinter the whole winter because they're not working as hard. Those bees are meant to just survive over the winter in the hive.
So it's one bee controlling the entire, like they're the sole one reproducing. Like it's just some dude comes up and knocks her up, and then she's the lone female. Like how does she get in that position?
Yeah. So what happens with a hive is, let's say a new beekeeper's going through the hive and they accidentally crush the queen.
Yeah.
What the bees will do is they'll take a 1-day-old egg, which is microscopic. It's too small to be able to see.
Yeah.
And they will, at least for us to see, and they'll fill that cell with royal jelly, which is a little bit like honey, but it's a substance they make just to feed to the bees as they, just to the queen. And then they'll build that cell bigger, and so she'll emerge bigger and stronger. And then they'll do that with as many cells as they can. Then the first one to hatch will sting the other ones to death through the wall of the cell. If 2 hatch at the same time, they'll actually fight. And 2 queen bees will fight. And then whoever wins, they'll go on a mating flight. And so that queen will fly out. She'll mate with maybe 18 different drones, which are the male bees. And then she'll fly back. And it's pretty incredible. She can actually choose whether to lay a fertilized or unfertilized egg. Unfertilized eggs will become our haploid cells and will become the male bees, the drones.
Okay.
And fertilized eggs will become the female bees. It's different than other biology works.
I heard the female bees run shit in the colonies too.
That's what it seems like.
It seems like the males are just there to just fuck.
That's pretty much how it works. So the
Pretty sweet.
The female bees do all the work. So the worker bees, they will
They just
be the-
deadbeats, just sitting on the couch all day.
yeah. So the drones they'll fly out and they'll try to mate with queens from other hives, and that's important for the colony's genetics because they're haploid cells, which means their genetic clone, the male bee, is a genetic clone of the female queen. And so it's the way that the hive reproduces as a superorganism. In the winter, they get kicked out of the hive, though.
Yeah.
So
Where do they go? Do they just die?
Yep, they'll die off, and then in the spring, the queen will lay more eggs for more male bees. And once you start seeing those, then you know that you can start breeding your own queens to split hives. And that's part of what I do is, in addition to selling honey, is I'll actually sell bees. And then I'll help people get started with beekeeping. So I have 75 locations where people say, I want bees in my yard. And I come and I bring beehives and boxes and teach them. And typically the homeowner will pay me either just to do everything to have bees there and give them a share of the honey, or they'll pay me to teach them how to keep bees and go through that whole process with them. So that's a big part of the business. Yeah. Over the last year, one thing that's changed is when bees get into people's walls and they're living in people's walls. Yeah. There's a big shortage of people who know how to cut bees out of walls because it's such a specialized thing that I started doing that in my company. And that's really expanded a lot. Nice. So I have a dedicated crew that's what they do is they'll go out and go into somebody's house. You'll have bees in the walls. We cut them out of the wall, rehive them. We've dedicated special bee vacuums that will actually vacuum up the extra bees that are flying around. And you'll be working inside someone's house like this. We'll cut actually a hole in their drywall and then cut the honeycomb out. So it's a really specialized skill. Most beekeepers don't do it. Yeah. I didn't do it for about 10 years. My first 10 years of beekeeping, I was like, I don't want to be inside someone else's house with people getting stung and running around. And you know, now after having a lot of experience and the right tools for it, I'm able to do it with a really high degree of accuracy so that it goes really well for the customer and the bees. And then we rehive those bees and we make honey from them. So
Wow, that's kind of a...
Yo,
Hello, Kyle. What are you doing?
nothing. Sitting here watching the game, smoking some Thrive.
Are you all alone? Who's that?
Yo, pick up the phone.
What's up?
Yo, Cheeto, pick up the phone.
Yo. What's up?
What you doing, son?
Nothing. Just chilling. Killing.
True.
We just had my buddy on, and he's an exterminator. So is that like a main competition for you guys? Are you guys looking at him like they're taking some of our business?
yeah, so the way that I like to look at it is that instead of, you know, and similarly to how the bees, you know, go about the world is instead of it being competition, I try to do everything like symbiotically. So with exterminators, we don't do a whole lot of yellow jacket removals. So I'd send those calls to them. They don't typically do a lot of honeybee removals because they can't kill honeybees.
Yeah.
So often I meet exterminators and they'll actually send me calls for honeybees.
Exterminators, they can't, as in like they don't have the equipment, or they're literally not allowed to do it.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. There's
They don't have the bee smoke.
They don't have the bee smoke. They can't keep
smoke.
up with the hunts.
Yeah, I don't want that smoke. I've seen the bee smoke.
Yeah.
So honeybees have all different protections. There's federal, state, local, legal protections around honeybees because they're so important.
No shit.
See the bees.
So you're not really supposed to just spray a can of Raid into bees' nest. The other problem is you could have 100 pounds of honey in your walls. If you just kill those bees, you still have 100 pounds of honey in your walls. And when it gets up to 95 degrees in the summer, that starts dripping out of your walls. And then you get mold and you get roaches like that honey and ants. And it just becomes a huge mess. So you
Right.
really need someone who cuts it open and takes it out.
Are you saying my dad was breaking federal law when he was spraying Raid into my basketball hoop? Because
Yeah, that's exactly.
So if it's a basket, most 9 out of 10 times I see it in a basketball hoop, it's yellow jackets.
Yeah.
So there
you
were
can tell him. I mean, my dad's dead. He's not going to be. The Fed's not going to dig him up.
They're
Slap some cuffs on him.
likely with basketball hoops and like things where it's smaller. Honeybees like much bigger dark dry space. So
Yeah.
maybe if it was like in the wall of a house or something, it would be honeybees. I'd suspect they're likely yellow jackets in that case.
What's
so.
the penalties for breaking the federal law going after the bees?
I'm not sure what the exact rule is. I imagine that a lot of it's at the discretion of the agencies that decide to go after it for it.
Who's the secret bee agency that goes after
The
it?
first one that pest control agencies worry about is the I could be wrong. I think it's by the Attorney General's office who regulate. So pest control is a regulated industry.
Right.
When you spray a chemical, you have a license to spray that. And if they find out that they're spraying something they shouldn't, or they're doing it in a way they shouldn't, that license can be taken away.
Interesting.
Yeah, if I'm a yellow jacket, I would hate honeybees. They seem like they're kind of like the cool protected class, and the yellow jackets just get a bad rap.
Untouchables.
But maybe justified. Yellow jackets do seem like they are just kind of dicks.
Yeah, where are wasps at? I hope they're in the bottom
Yeah,
shelf.
not a wasp.
Yeah,
not a wasp guy.
so I kind of agree on both counts. Like yellow jackets do get a bad rap because like everyone says, oh, I would just want pollinators. Well, most thing like insects that fly are pollinating to some degree.
Yeah.
But also I agree that yellow jackets and wasps in general are just kind of obnoxious. Like the main difference biologically is a honeybee has a barbed stinger like a fish hook. So if a honeybee stings you, it's only going to sting you to protect its hive, but then it will die after it stings you.
Got it.
So, and as it flies away, it actually rips its intestines out. Oh. And so it's really bad for the honeybee. As much as it hurts to get stung, it hurts the bee a lot worse. Yeah. So honeybees really don't want to sting. They will if they're protecting their hive. And most of the time I'm working on a hive, the bees think they're protecting it.
Right.
Bunch of kamikazes.
Yellow jackets and different and wasps in general typically have a smooth stinger. So that means they can go in and they can sting you 10 times in a row with the same bee
okay, got
and
it.
fly away and be just fine. And so they are much less hesitant to sting, and their stings can be just as bad. The biggest thing I actually ever got stung by was one of those cicada killers. They're like 3 inches long.
Oh yeah.
They come out of the ground like every few years or something, and they'll actually eat an entire cicada, and they're actually not geared towards stinging people. Like they're not going to go after you and sting you. Like they sting to kill their prey and eat it.
Yeah.
But I was in the attic of a garage cleaning out some beekeeping equipment, and there was one, and I was leaving it alone, and it was leaving me alone. And because it sounds kind of funny, but like bees have body language, same as like mammals do. Like,
Sure.
you can tell if a dog's friendly or aggressive. I can do that with bees.
What's a telltale, like some
So if it's
signs of
flying
aggression?
straight at your face and in a straight line,
Not
and a
hard
big
to read.
buzz- but if it's going zigzag back and forth, it's buzzing up to a flower and then continuing on. That's a bee looking for nectar. Bees flying straight at your face and crashing into you are actually warning you, and then straight and landing and holding on and trying to bend over and sting. That's a bee trying to sting you.
Yeah.
The Japanese.
Yeah.
The Japanese.
The Japanese. Yeah, true.
my
The
God.
most
So-
honorable death. Yeah.
So I try to make I make a split second decision if I'm not in a bee suit and something like that happens, where if a bee lands on me, depending on the buzzing sound it's making and the way that it's flying, whether to try to brush it away or just leave it.
Oh, wow.
Because if it's, and usually I can have pretty high consistency of whether or not that bee's trying to get me.
Do you think bees smell other bees on you? No, but you're less entitled to get stinged on.
So alarm pheromones are definitely, it's a big part of how they communicate is through pheromones. So if you have a day where you just get covered in bees and they're all trying to sting you, and then you wear that same bee suit the next day out to the bee yard, you'll get close to the hives and they'll all go for you. So like one of the things I do is I have 4 bee suits and I wash them regularly. So that same scent. A lot of hobby beekeepers that I consult for, they have 1 bee suit and they wear it an hour every 2 weeks, so it doesn't get washed that often. And so they'll call me out and be like, "Hey, my hive's super aggressive," and there's a list of things that I'll go through, and one of them is wash your suit because that alarm pheromone could be on it. This cicada killer actually landed on the back of my neck, and I was getting down out of this loft. And I felt it and I grabbed it and it stung me right in the spine, and it felt like a framing nail. It was just the biggest. It wasn't, so they don't have venom in the way that honeybees do.
Right.
But the actual sting was very painful.
Yeah,
So-
I bet. Right in the spine, too.
And just psychologically pulling something that's an entire handful off and throwing it on the ground.
That's crazy.
I mean, with that being back to like honeybees, this is what a question I have for you. How much of a psycho did the first guy who tried to get honey have to be? To see bees flying all over, having no idea what it is. It's just like a gelatinous liquid that he's like, I have to eat that.
Yeah. So it's funny. Honey harvesting is actually one of the oldest, goes all the way back before agriculture to hunter-gatherer cultures.
Oh, wow.
Because basically, like, I'm sure who we think of like as cavemen, like the prehistoric man walking around in the woods, basically just taking bites out of everything to see what's edible, and then whatever is, then they tell the rest of the tribe. And the idea is, so honeybees live in hollow trees in nature, and if one of those hollow trees tend to fall down, and then eventually the hive leaves, and so probably this person was going along and ate some of this honey. Now, the hollow trees also fill up with water, and so when honey is exposed to a lot of water, it has natural yeast and will ferment into mead. And so the oldest form of alcohol is actually mead. People think it's beer because water got into grain storage and then people drank it anyway. And that's kind of how beer started. But mead, alcohol made from honey, actually predates beer by potentially centuries, because grain storage wasn't even around for long after that. So they drank that and ate that, and
So yeah, then I guess it's totally worth it. Not only do you get to taste one of the most delectable things probably in prehistoric times, then you can find out later you get hammered off of it.
Yeah.
I can see why they keep going back.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense then.
I would capture so many bees if I was back then.
Yeah, 100%.
Have bees evolved? Like, like going back in the day where it's like you had like your mastodons and you had like your, like, they even said flies were maybe like 5 feet back then and they had stingers and stuff. Have bees evolved since like prehistoric times?
Absolutely. And there's, one of the things about how things evolve is the smaller something is and the faster it reproduces, the faster it can evolve. So in college, we did a study with fruit flies because they reproduce like every 2 days or something ridiculous. And if you stick half of the population of fruit flies in a freezer for longer and longer amount of times, you can breed fruit flies that can last longer and longer in the freezer over the course of a couple of weeks because they just breed so quickly. Honeybees are kind of interesting because they evolve. The size of a honeybee is determined by the cell it's raised in. And so one of the ways that they've changed in recent history was we started making bigger cells by putting bigger foundation into the hive. So kind of encouraging the bees to build bigger cells. That created bigger bees. And the idea was that bigger is better for the bees. And it turns out that actually the small cell, the bees have certain advantages with they are raised faster, become adult bees faster, and they're more resistant to mites and some of the diseases and stuff that they.
What's the life expectancy of bees?
It's not very long. In the summer, it could be about a month if they're working for the individual bee, because they're just working really, really hard all day. In the winter, it can be several months, but the hive itself can live indefinitely because the queen can live 2 to 4 years.
Oh, okay.
And when she dies, they can replace her. They can find a day-old egg, feed it royal jelly, and then create a new queen that'll then fight with the other queens to see who becomes queen.
In the colony.
The ladies are kind of the big dogs.
We don't hear about like bees more, like women talking about bees being like, we got to be more like the bees.
Yeah, you would think. Well, I think it seems as though like liberal women are just the queen bee in their head.
Yeah, the queen bees. They should be like they decide the votings. They decide who to kick out.
They mate with 18 dudes and then bring it back to the house. Yeah,
what a life.
That's pretty cool. Going back to like the evolution of it, my understanding would be they would need, for evolution, there would have to be like a natural predator. Like, who's a bee's predator? Is there anything out there that's eating just bees?
So there's unfortunately several things. Right now, the Varroa destructor mite, let's just talk about a middle name, Destructor.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
The Varroa destructor mite's pretty bad. It's basically kind of like a tick for honeybees.
Right.
But if you scaled a honeybee up to the size of a person, the mite would be scaled up to the size of a rabbit. So imagine a tick the size of a rabbit. So they're really bad, obviously. They infest hives and we treat with a variety of things to prevent them. There's a lot of people who are trying to breed treatment-free bees or basically just have bees that are more resistant to those mites. And the problem with that is if you've got 100 hives and you're trying to breed resistant bees and you don't treat them with anything, then you might have 98 hives die, and then you have to have enough money to get another 100 hives or breed those last 2 to slowly get something that's more and more resistant. Randy Oliver with Scientific Beekeeping is a person who works with doing a lot of those tests in a scientific way.
Yeah.
And then the Department of Agriculture regulates what you're allowed to do and what you're allowed to treat them with. On a bigger scale, bears are a huge threat to honeybees in areas where we have bears. Thankfully, of my 75 locations where I help people keep bees, we don't have. I had one location that had bear for a couple of years, and is northern Pennsylvania, and we were able to put that one in like a courtyard because I was like, I'm not messing with bears.
Yeah, that seems
third one, Christopher Robin.
Yeah, it's a sleepy bear, with a t-shirt on and no pants.
Bears will knock over a hive. They're mostly looking for the brood, but also I'm sure they're not turning down the honey.
Sure,
the brood is the young bees, and they're very rich in fats and proteins.
And they're just
things.
scarfing.
Yep.
Eating
And
through
then-
the stinger too. The stinger while they eat it has no.
So bear's fur is thick enough that typically, I mean, they don't like it, but they can't. They're not. The bees aren't stinging through very much. It's
Right.
mostly their face that's getting stung.
It's kind of like a horse fly on a cow, right?
Same kind of deal.
Ah.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate that there isn't a lot of bears, and then there's in the area that I have bees is mostly suburban backyards. In Delaware County, Montgomery County, and Chester County. Yeah. So then we have the hive beetle, which is a small beetle that goes into the hives. That's an interesting one because it's been around since before I started keeping bees, but everybody always would say it's a nuisance. It's not really a threat. And in the last 3 years with the mild winters we've been having, it really became a threat, and they just started obliterating hives. And so now we're working on ways to destroy the hive beetles, so they don't.
This
destroy
one has
our
been
hives.
cold as shit. Is this good for the bees?
So it's a mixed bag because it will help take out a lot of those hive beetles that are in the ground and in the colonies. But at the same time, the bees have to eat more honey to stay warm, and they have to cluster closer, and they have to have more bees just to create body heat. So there's a trade-off there.
What about like a bee greenhouse to keep them warm? It sounds like winter and women are their only
So
Story of my life,
villains.
dude. Yeah.
Winter
Yeah.
and women are it's every guy that's ever lived in the Northeast.
Yeah.
Winter and women.
So there's a variety of different things people have tried to get bees through the winter more successfully. Greenhouses specifically are a little tough just because bees don't deal with glass that well. They just buzz against it until they die. There's people in the Midwest who will put bees in big potato cellars, and they'll actually move their colonies inside for the winter and try to have them in a more stable temperature range, and then move them back out for the summer. Around here, that's not very common. We insulate the hives. I insulate the top half of the hive. I'm actually testing this year with a solid 6 inches of insulation on top of each of my hives to make sure that they have enough top insulation. And then if that goes well, I may increase the amount of side insulation that I have for them. But heat rises, and also condensation is going to form on the coldest surface. We want that to be the walls where it drips down and the bees can drink it if they need extra water, and not the top like ceiling so that it drips down onto the bees, because then they can't stay as warm if they're wet. So.
This is something I wondered, and we ask a lot of dumb guy questions, so bear with us. But like, the big thing that goes to honeybees is that they pollinate, then it spreads across crops, and then crops grow from that.
Yes.
Couldn't I just do that? Like, couldn't I just walk around with like a pocket full and just kind of dish it out? Like, what does a honeybee have that they couldn't just like industry couldn't do?
Yeah,
honestly, yeah,
What's
really.
a honeybee have that I don't have?
More of a jealousy thing than anything. Yeah.
In China, they actually had this situation where they killed off enough of the bee population that they needed to do hand pollination.
Oh, okay.
And so they had kids climb trees with paintbrushes and literally go from flower to flower, moving the pollen. And it's fairly common practice in like a small backyard, or like if you want to grow plants where you just have a few of them, then it's easier to hand pollinate. Is a thing that people do. The real thing is that honeybees can fly. They can pollinate. To make this 1 pound of honey, they pollinated 2 million flowers.
Oh,
How
geez.
long does that take?
So it took 864 bees their entire lifetime to make this.
So 1 month?
About a month.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, over the course of a whole hive, I might
probably do
get
it.
20 to 50 pounds of honey from a hive. So you figure 80,000 bees in a hive pollinating millions of flowers, and then the migratory pollinators, which are really the beekeepers who are focused on pollination. They put 408 hives with 80,000 bees each onto a tractor trailer, and they'll drive it to California, pollinate the almond groves. Then they'll drive it to, up the coast a little bit, do more pollination. They have a whole loop that they do. I don't do migratory pollination, but
Could you imagine that truck overturning? Oh,
Just a swarm of
shit.
bees. I mean, that would be
Yeah.
my nightmare.
My bees got loose. How do you can't keep track of them. They're now the
I guess they're just out. Or would they return back? Would they go back, speaking of the pheromones, to like a familiar place?
Yeah, so we're actually working with a group to put together a national beekeeping disaster task force for situations like that.
So we're gonna have not a pandemic response task force, but we will have a bee task force.
So yeah,
What a place.
it's
you start tagging bees.
yeah. So when those trucks tip over, it's more common in California, just because the nature of the agriculture there, they use more bees. But it happened a few years ago in Delaware, and it's really bad. We have I'm also a nationally certified firefighter, and fire gear is they're not stinging through the bunker jacket, but the Nomex hoods that you wear,
Not bee retardant.
they are able to sting through that if they need to. So. So basically what they do is the local fire department tries to get people to roll up their windows and direct traffic, and the everyone kind of avoids the area, and then they try to get local beekeepers out there with the full bee suits, and you put a lot of smoke because we have the smokers.
Yeah, what's the smoke?
I just burn pine needles. Yeah.
What's it do?
So it's kind of does a couple of things. It's similar to if you're sitting around a campfire and smoke goes in your eyes, you move to a different spot. So it moves the bees. It also blocks that alarm pheromone that we were talking about. So they're not, if one bee's angry at you and letting off all this alarm pheromone, it's being blocked with the smoke. So the other bees aren't going to go after you. And then the other thing they do is they eat a lot of honey when there's smoke, because if there's a forest fire and they need to evacuate the hive, they want to be filled up with honey. And when a bee's stomach's filled with honey, it can't sting as effectively.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, I can't do anything effectively when after I eat. So I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
So by smoking the whole area and the beehives, you can kind of start getting things put back together. Bees in an environment like that will clump up. And so you try to get those little clumps kind of into some kind of a hive. And then several of the swarms, if the disaster is bad enough, will try to fly away, and you may have a wild swarm, which is something we catch a lot of, where either bees are abandoning a hive that was on a truck that crashed, or if a tree falls down and it has a hive in it, a lot of times they'll leave. Or if a hive's just naturally splitting, the queen will fly away with half the bees. They'll form a new queen. And then we'll have a huge clump of bees on a bush, and people call me out to rescue those as well.
Has there ever been like a bee 9/11? Like, I'm just thinking, like, you guys obviously study like different cases and stuff. And
I'm excited about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
what's good?
So I just don't know, like, when you're in college, you're learning about this stuff and everything. Was there ever been like, holy shit, a truck tipped over in California and 800,000 bees just got loose or died?
So the trucks tipping over is definitely one of the like bigger bee incidents that we deal with. Colony collapse disorder is kind of starting around the time I was starting beekeeping. Basically, commercial beekeepers would go out to their hives, and a third of them would just be gone.
And no reason why it was gone?
The problem is if your hives get sprayed with pesticides and all the bees die, you can take those bees, you can send them to the lab, and they can test them and say these bees have pesticide on them. That's what killed them. The problem with colony collapse disorder, and they're still doing studies and trying to understand it, is that whatever the bees were eating, it affected their ability to navigate.
Right.
So bees have a very complex navigation system. A bee will leave the hive and find some flowers, and then they'll navigate back to the hive and tell by the shortest possible route, even if that's not the route they took to get there. And then they'll tell the other bees where that nectar source was by using triangulation between the hive, the nectar source, and the sun. And they'll communicate all of that by dancing on a vertical surface in the pitch dark. And then they'll regurgitate some of the nectar to show them what kind of nectar it was.
Which is no idea where they went because the navigation system's so off. Am I getting
So
that?
what was happening with colony collapse disorder was the bees just weren't making it back to the hive. So you did just have these hives that were just empty. And so then if it's empty, you can't test the bees and see what happened with, what kind of pesticide they had in their system and things like that, because they just weren't in the hive. They're just completely gone.
It's like bees on Rumspringa, kind of.
Yeah, you're just describing Vito after a couple of strawberry martinis.
Just totally gone.
Just totally like,
gone.
where do I live?
We can't find him. He's not coming back.
If he's margaritas, sorry, not martinis.
His belly's full of honey.
Thanks for the correction.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean he gets out of Delco, has a couple of strawberry margaritas, and he's like, "Where's the hotel?
Yes.
Where's
So that was definitely a bigger like situation where it took a long time, and I think that a lot of right after that the Varroa destructor mite started coming in as a really big culprit in killing off hives, reinfesting hives. And then just when we started getting a handle on the Varroa destructor mite, hive beetle is now coming up as the next big challenge.
Right.
Now for my business, because I teach beekeeping and I help people with their hives, each time there's a challenge like that, and because it's my full-time job, I can devote a lot of time and energy to finding the best solutions that are out there. I'm not usually doing the cutting edge research, but I can call it up and talk to the people who are, and then develop that as a plan for people in our whole area to do. And then I can package each individual part of that as a service. So for example, the small hive beetle, I was able to do a lot of research and there's beetle traps that you can use, and there's beneficial nematodes, which are basically worms, microscopic worms that eat hive beetle larvae, and hive beetle larvae is in the ground. And so I actually have that shipped in cold. I look through a microscope. You can see it like them wiggling around, dilute them into water and go out and put them all around my hives.
Wow.
But as soon as I figure that method out for myself, I post out to the entire beekeeping community and I tell them, if anyone else wants this, you can pay me to come out and do it on your property, or I'll just talk people through it for free.
Right.
Because if we all treat for the hive beetles, the next year there's fewer hive beetles.
Yeah. So I wonder, this might be another dumb one, but like you said, you were burning pine cones and that elicits a smoke that like disrupts. With it becoming more legalized, would like burning weed have any effect that mellows them so you can navigate things better? Or does that have?
So there's a story where the founding fathers actually, who were, they'd go to Philadelphia and they'd have their meetings about constitutions and stuff, and then they would go out to their country estates, and a lot of them were beekeepers because it was kind of considered like a gentleman's profession. And they were also coincidentally growing hemp for the Navy. And so there was there's an idea that they would actually burn hemp, which is a little different than what people are smoking today.
Yeah.
And the bees would be very calm and easy to work and things like that. Personally, I've never tried it. I don't know how much it would cost to fill a smoker with
blowing smoke in your dog's face.
Yeah, that'd be a tough one. Vito, tear up watching it happen.
I have gotten the bees drunk once accidentally though.
Oh,
how so?
So I was trying to make mead.
Trying to get in with the queen bee.
And
I like that.
so I was trying to make mead by basically adding water to honey with natural yeast in it. Then you stir it every couple of days so that it aerates it. I was using a big pickle jar, and the metal spoon I was using hit the side of the glass jar and it broke it. And so it spilled sticky honey water mead all over the floor. And I was kind of bummed because I was working on it for like a couple of weeks.
Sure.
So I took all these towels and I was kind of like, when you make a mess in your mom's kitchen, you're just kind of like throwing towels on it and moving it around, like just trying to get it sort of clean. And then after I had all these sticky towels, I just threw them out on the back porch. And I was like, oh, the bees will clean it off. So the bees found it, like I was talking about. One bee finds it and they tell the other bees. And so there's all these bees flying around, and I was like, they're acting pretty weird. And they're buzzing back and forth. They're bumping into things, and then they settle down. And yeah, it turned out that they were, I'd gotten the bees drunk, which I'm sure doesn't take a whole lot of alcohol.
Yeah, they're lightweight too. That's got to be. Thank God people know you're a beekeeper, because if they see you throwing out sticky towels in your backyard, they're gonna be like, something bad's going on in there.
Yeah.
How about that? I always wonder if that's the question that I had about weed, if like those kind of things still affect them. But I guess pretty universally it'll hit you.
Yeah, I'm sure. Bees' cognitive processes are a little different, but I'm sure it would have a somewhat similar effect for bees and other creatures. Yeah,
So it's 30 degrees and you're wearing sandals. Are you just a sandals all year round guy?
We were just
Yep.
talking about this, yeah.
Yep, I'm sandals all year round.
With bees and with
I used to do a lot more barefoot beekeeping
What?
and
Really?
beekeeping with sandals. I typically these days wear closed toe shoes of some kind when I'm in the
what do you like
beehive.
about the barefoot beekeeping?
I really enjoy being barefoot. On the hippier, like kind of more of a hippie idea, but bees have a thing where and I'm not saying this is scientifically proven, but it was an interesting theory I came across, where bees, when they land on a flower, they change the electromagnetic field of that flower, and then the next bee can tell that flower's already been landed on and the bee's already eaten the nectar, so they just move on. It's like one of the ways that they navigate the world. So bees have a very strong sense of electromagnetic field, and if you combine that with the idea of grounding, which is people reinventing the idea of being barefoot. I didn't need to reinvent it because I've been barefoot all along.
Yeah.
Then your electromagnetic field is kind of grounded to the earth. So all that to say is there might be a positive benefit to being barefoot. I just prefer being barefoot or wearing sandals.
There definitely is a positive effect. You scrape your feet along the floor, then you go touch somebody, get to shock them.
Yeah.
Yep. That's
There's a lot going on. Yeah.
That's
But if
the
they're
idea.
pheromone sensitive, you got to be careful to not have some stinky bitters down there. I imagine you got to wash those bad boys.
The
Careful with the honey on
feet haven't been as big a deal. I definitely think there's a correlation sometimes if it's detergents, different detergents that I put on my clothes or stuff. It's something you get. The last thing I want is some kind of cologne that smells like alarm pheromone with all the bees going after me.
Yeah. Can the
Panic
bees-
by Gucci.
Can the bees see color?
So they see closer to the infrared spectrum. So they see color, but they don't see the same colors that we see.
So if I'm night vision goggles.
It's more similar to that.
Do you like the bee movie?
I prefer the Beekeeper,
Statham movie.
Yep.
Statham, yeah.
Yep. Basically, they took John Wick and they remade it as they basically took John Wick, made him a beekeeper, made him go after phone scammers. And
I don't blame you. I would love the hot beekeeper movie way more than Jerry Seinfeld's animated cartoon.
Yeah, Jerry Seinfeld's voice the entire time is a tough one. Yeah.
yeah, it was. It's definitely a tough movie because a lot of times it's the only thing people know about beekeeping.
Sure.
And
what's that?
so it's the bee movie.
I've never seen it. So what do people what do they come after you with?
They say, that according to physics, bees can't fly, which if that were true, bees wouldn't fly.
It kind of disproves itself pretty quickly.
Seinfeld just
just a little bit.
throwing around disinformation.
That's the greatest argument.
Just
It's
a little bit.
they are doing it though.
And it's interesting how that kind of facts work in beekeeping. I think it dates back to originally some scientific person who was I don't know how this works. And people are oh, it's impossible for it to happen, even though it's happening. And it's similar to the Varroa destructor mite we were talking about earlier. Pretty much every article and book you read on it will say that it drinks the blood of the bees. But it turns out that was an assumption made by a Russian scientist a long time ago, and it's just been circularly quoted on so many sources that it's now taken as fact, even though more recent studies are showing that they eat the bees' fatty tissue. As beekeepers, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
They hurt the bees.
They're still dead, yeah.
They're still dead. But it's really interesting to see that something that is considered scientific fact has been disproven, but because there's so many circular quotes, where basically they quote this as a source and this is quoting this as a source, and it just kind of goes in that pattern for sometimes 100 years, where they just assume this is true, but nobody's actually gone back and proven it yet.
Right.
And a lot of times when they do, they disprove it.
Are bees responsible for carrying around or transmitting viruses or any kind of bacteria that affect humans? Or is that not anything that they can really do?
So it's not typically things that affect humans. The biggest way that a bee will affect humans negatively is if you get stung.
Yeah.
There's definitely diseases that transmit between bees, and that's one of the problems that we have these days. Is that because of the way that agriculture works in our country. So instead of a farm that grows 10 different things, we have farms that grow hundreds of thousands of acres of one thing. In order to do that, you need to truck in bees with the migratory beekeeping. And then, so a huge percentage of the bees in the country go to California for the almond season because you can make a lot of money pollinating almonds, which, you know, is a great way to make a living keeping bees. But then they all spread out back across the country. So if there's one tiny pest that's in some random hives in Oregon, and then those hives, all the hives get together in California, and then they all spread out again. It's similar math to how pandemics and everything else works, where that disease or pest or whatever it is has been spread across the country.
Will the queen bee carry any STDs since she's fucking so much?
True.
No, that's not as much of a concern with honeybees, but they definitely, especially because it's just the one mating flight, and drones die after they mate, so it's, you know, a pretty effective way to
Could be because of
avoid those sorts of things.
Yeah, you got to envy it, dude. What a lifestyle.
live for a month, have a bunch of sex, not be relied on.
It's got to be tough if you're like the one drone who's like bragging about the queen and they're all like, yeah, we did too. It's like, God damn it.
Yeah, well, they tend to die immediately after having sex with the queen.
Oh, really?
Though. Yeah.
Oh, so it's kind of like the praying mantis, right?
so they don't-
The praying mantis.
yeah.
The woman bites the male's head off.
Yeah, this one it's just part of the process that they die, and there's actually specific areas where they will go meet up, like where drones will congregate and find the queen. So a lot of times when you're trying to breed really healthy queens, you take hives that have tons and tons of drones in them, and you put those out around the hives that you're trying to mate, and there'll be an area where you'll have tons of drones and you'll have a really well mated queen.
Okay.
And then I also sell queens.
Really? What's a queen go for nowadays?
So it really depends on the scale. So if you're doing hundreds and hundreds of hives, you can people sell you 100 queens for $2,000 or something, where it's like $20 a queen. For me, it tends to be smaller scale services. It tends to be people who have 2 hives in their backyard. One is missing a queen. They need it today and they need someone to help them install it. And so I sell queens for like $100, $150. But then I bring it out and install it.
Yeah, this is queen bees, not queens. This is not like an Epstein operation.
When I used to,
yeah. Oh, there he is. We're looking forward. Yeah.
When I used to, before I drove and I took public transit a lot, I'd always be on my cell phone and talking about bees. There's so many different words where you're talking about queens and you're talking about nukes. So a nucleus colony, we call them nukes.
Yeah.
So I will have a very sincere conversation on the phone about buying and selling nukes.
Sure.
And it's like, it's a very different conversation than if you're joking about it or you're talking. So people get kind of concerned that I'm like, yeah, I can buy and sometimes I'm talking about Russian nukes.
Oh,
because
dude, you're on a list.
honeybees,
There's no doubt you're on a list.
honeybees,
keeping an eye on you.
the people who breed them will breed. They're all kind of European honeybees is what we have.
They smallpox?
They don't have smallpox currently, but they sell like Italian honeybees and Russian honeybees, and
That's just got a bad temper.
they
Of course.
so they're so, and then those different strains are associated with different temperaments. Now, the reality is the queens are out there mating, the drones are out there mating. Everything that's currently for sale is pretty much a mix, unless you're doing the artificially inseminated queens, which are like the breeder queens.
You can artificially inseminate a bee?
Yep. I don't personally do it. You need like a laboratory and stuff. And they do it for, they do it with, I think they put them to sleep with I want to say liquid nitrogen, but it's the cold gas.
Cold gas.
Yeah.
And then, but they do that for if you're trying to breed, like it's just like horses. You got the race horse that like is going to breed really good race horses, thousands and thousands of dollars for, even the offspring of that horse. It's the same thing with bees. You get a breeder queen that does that.
How do you identify your secretariat of bees?
Well, mostly how much honey they produce and stuff. And I'll see bees for sale, and they say, "Oh, it's the great granddaughter of this queen by this beekeeper."
Wow, the lineage.
So some people get really into it.
Nepo bees.
It's hard to know exactly because there isn't the money in it that there is in horse racing. You're not microchipping them.
Yeah. Well, yet you do want to start that.
Microchipping bees would be interesting. I think the technology would have to be a little smaller. We do mark our queens. We use a little paint. And some people do a number. You can do a sticky number on the back of the queen. But it was funny when the Russia-Ukraine thing happened, everybody who's selling Russian bees, Russia got a really bad rap. And all of a sudden those sellers are all selling Ukrainian bees now because, you know, there's some like historical thing about the different strains of bees, but I think a lot of it these days is more of a marketing thing of like Russian bees tend to be better producers. Italians are supposed to be gentler. But most bees that you're buying are a mix.
Kind of fits like the real world people stereotypes.
Yeah.
Italians are gentle folks. The Russians are a little more,
you know, in your face.
And then like not making the distinction anymore between Russia and Ukraine for the bees is kind of like what I think Russia's doing right now. So
went from Igor to Ivan.
True. It's all in the same family.
Man, is there a bee black market?
So there's bee rustling. In California, if you've 408 hives is what fits on a semi truck.
Yeah.
And if you have those on pallets and they get dropped in a field where there's nobody's watching them, you have no internet service or anything, and then you go back to the hotel. And this is a little different side of the industry than I do, because I don't do migratory beekeepers. But another person will drive up in a truck with a forklift, and they will load up those hives of bees. They can steal hundreds of thousands of dollars in a truckload for a crime that, at least now they're starting to take it a little more seriously, but for a long time, you know, people wouldn't take it as seriously as cattle or something else just because it's not something people are used to. Now we're putting, you know, people put GPS trackers in the hives, and people go after bee rustling the same way people go after cattle rustling, not nicely.
Not like dog fighting too.
Yeah, it's so it's very you know, but people would be able to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars of bees and equipment overnight. And so that was a big concern. Honey laundering is also a thing where you will have so like importing honey from China kept on flooding the market with rice syrup and corn syrup and really low quality honey, and so the government was like, okay, we're not buying honey from China anymore. And a lot of this is oversimplified, but so China ships it to Vietnam, and Vietnam now it's imported and sold here in like big supermarkets that rhyme with Walmart.
No way. All right. Wow. Dude, I'll never buy my honey from Walmart ever.
As Vietnamese honey or Mexican honey, because that's where it was bottled, but it wasn't actually produced there.
Yeah.
And so then it's corn syrup and rice syrup and things like that. Whereas when I sell my honey, I don't even mix honey from different yards together. If my honey from the yard in Havertown isn't mixed with my yard media, and then I'll often label the actual front of the bottle of where the honey comes from.
Where's this honey you're giving us?
Let's see.
Yeah, let's see. I would like to see a little bit.
Yeah, so this is my media. This media honey.
Oh, Delco honey, I like that.
Oh, media, that's beautiful.
I have a Havertown one.
Oh yeah? Which one's better?
I like them both. I've never really had bad honey.
Nice.
But
Is this an issue that people are feeding kids below the age of 1 honey? And what happens with that?
yeah, so the belief is that kids below 1 are more susceptible to botulism.
What's that?
Botulism is like a developmental, I don't know all that much about it. It's a developmental illness that really young children have. Now, kids under 1 typically don't eat solid food.
Yeah,
So they're not eating like broccoli and getting botulism from there. But everybody thinks like, oh, honey, like the kid can like eat a little bit of honey and their immune systems just aren't built up enough. That being said,
You give them like a TBI or something like that? Or what would it do if you have some honey underneath one?
if it happened to have the idea is that if it happened to have botulism and their immune system was weak enough, then the kid could get botulism, which is like not a good thing.
Sure, yeah.
But the catch there is that you can't ethically take 100 kids under 1 and feed them all honey and see how many get botulism. So they have to, like a lot of warning labels, we have to put it on everything because you can't ethically test how big of a risk it would be.
It seems like a very high risk, low reward to begin with.
Right.
It's not even.
So it's just, I put it on the labels because that's the management, the best practices in the industry. these days, most parents who have a kid, like if a lesson like that, they'll have the mommy and me classes and all that stuff will have already gone over, like all the stuff not to feed them and all the little things that they could put in their mouth and choke on and everything else. So it's typically an added level of protection, but it's nice that we can fit it on the label because that's about the only case that you ever see honey being an issue. It doesn't go bad. They found some in the Egyptian tombs that was still good.
No way.
Wow.
Yeah, so it'll crystallize over time if it's real raw honey. This is from this year. It hasn't crystallized yet, but over time it'll kind of solidify. It makes really good and warm toast. But when they went to the Egyptian tombs, there was still honey in there that was good.
Wow,
That's crazy.
What we haven't talked about this one yet. What's the deal with carpenter bees? Are they just like kind of the big dumb cousin of the real dog? Like, what is up with
I
that?
feel like they get the worst rap. 'Cause
That's what
they're
it feels
huge.
like. Yeah.
So carpenter bees are interesting. They are obviously they're different than honeybees, but they chew into wood and they can over time with enough of them, they can do real damage. But it's not like termites where it's like your entire house all right away. The ones that'll go after you with carpenter bees are the male bees are the aggressive ones, but they can't sting. The female ones can sting, but they're not really aggressive. They're kind of hanging out in the hive.
Right.
And carpenter bees don't like any kind of vibration. So if you put a boom box right next to it, their colony, they'll sometimes leave. But yeah, I don't deal with
Sounds like the
carpenter
neighborhood
bees.
sounds like white people. Yeah.
I don't deal with carpenter bees a whole lot. I do. Bold-face hornets are one that I've started to do a little bit of work with in terms of removing them. But they make these massive papery nests, and one day you'll just go outside and all of a sudden there's this huge nest there. But I don't do anything that I have to spray any kind of chemical. And so I use a large commercial shop vac, and I actually shop vac the bees that are coming out. And I have a microphone stand that I'll put up right in front of their entrance. And then I hit on the nest, and all the bees that are coming back to the nest will go in. All the bold-face hornets and all the ones that are out will go into the vacuum. And then I'll slowly kind of tear the nest down and get all the bees out of it and eventually just freeze whatever's left.
Were you like every kid where you would try to trap a bee and try to trap a fly into the same glass
Yeah, have them duel.
and then put a little a cover on it and then watch them fight like we were?
No, I've never done that specific experiment. I think I was too busy with the 80,000 bees in the
Yeah,
hive.
there's a little more
Just for,
time.
like,
Trying to.
I'm catching this fly and this fly is going to go.
Yeah,
toe
you
to-
have more nefarious
Go to toe to
intentions
toe
with
with my
these
bees.
bees, dude.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I don't know if I ever had the patience to like line
12
the two
rounds.
up, try to get them to fight.
What about there's I can't think of the name of the flies, but the ones that are like an invasive species that came over like on a cargo ship.
Spotted lanternfly.
Spotted lanternflies. Did they
Yeah.
interface with the bees at all? Is there any issues with you being in the area?
No, so what they'll actually do.
Talk about a good 12-round fight.
Yeah,
A
that's
hornet
what I'm
versus
saying.
spotted lanternfly.
Oh yeah,
Although the spotted
that would
lantern,
be-
aren't they like they're blind and they just can't really do anything beneficial? Is that my understanding?
They seem to hop well, but so
True.
when spotted lanternflies eat the trees that they like to eat, they produce this basically what they poop out is honeydew, which is like this sticky resin. And what we found the year that they were really bad in this area, they were only like here for like, it seemed like they were super bad for a year or two, and then they were just gone. I don't know if they ate all the food crops or they found better ways of controlling them, but the bees would actually eat the honeydew and produce spotted lanternfly. Like the honeybees would eat the honeydew and produce honey out of it. And so some of the other beekeepers in the areas are actually marketing and selling spotted lanternfly honey.
Oh,
so
that sounds
some
like a
people
way
like it,
worse
some
one.
people don't. I don't think it kind of has a darker color. I don't think that many of mine. I didn't really notice that many of mine had a big effect on it. So.
That seems like a tough marketing to be like the bees are eating spotted lanternfly shit, and then
Yeah.
we're making honey from it.
Yes.
Line up at the store. That's all for you guys. I don't know how that's like a big selling point.
I never tried to use it as a sales pitch, but I've known a couple other people who say it sells really well. So
Wow.
maybe if they come back, maybe that's something I'll try.
Different strokes. I
Killer
guess.
bees, real or fake?
So killer bees are real. There's two different kind of categories that people confuse. There's the Africanized killer bees. Basically, people took Italian honeybees and African honeybees, and they tried to breed them together to make a gentle, good producing honeybee. And then everybody says, oh, they escaped, but honeybees are usually free range, so that's probably just swarmed. And then they actually got into the country in two different, by the coast and up through Mexico. And so down south, you'll get hives that look just like honeybees, normal honeybees. They produce honey, you take care of them, but the genetics are just such that they flip a switch and they just go berserk on you. I've dealt with one hive that was had come up from down south, and I believe it was probably kind of Africanized, which is the term for when you get some of those genes. So it's not like it's the specific bees coming up. It's those bees are breeding with these bees, and you get some of those genes. Same thing if you have dogs. That dog, people think pit bulls are more aggressive. If the dog has a little bit of pit bull in it, it may be a more aggressive.
Yeah.
It's just a genetic thing.
So you're saying the migrant bees are terrorizing the U.S.?
In a way, yeah. Not in so many words, but yeah.
But yeah, so
Aurora, Colorado has never been the same.
They're taking American jobs. Yeah, I told them I could pollinate, and they're doing it for me.
With the honeybees, they will, like normal honeybees. If you go into a hive, there's a bunch of different phases that I went through, named one year. It's like the first, they're just curious, they don't care that you're there. Then they're curious about you being there. Then they're like defensive. They're warning you. They're flying. Then they're actually defensive. And then it goes all the way up to like total wars. Like if you just go up to a hive, you kick it over and you just like get them really mad. You don't usually do that sort of thing, but I've been working on hives sometimes where something moves and accidentally the hive falls over. All of a sudden the bees are pretty mad. And then you might have like 100 bees trying to sting you. Whereas like Africanized bees, you go up to the hive, you take the lid off, and all of a sudden you have 100,000 bees trying to sting you, and they're just all. And then you walk away from the hive. Normal honeybees, as you get further away, they get less and less interested in following you. When you have bees that are more aggressive, you will get they'll actually chase you for further and stuff like that.
I heard that if you jump in, if a certain bee is chasing you and you jump into a pool, they will just hover above the pool until you come out.
Yeah, it's with honeybees. I think they would do that if you got them. You'd have to get them really mad for them to do that. Most honeybees are going to lose interest because, for the most part, honeybees are purely defensive. They're really, people say, "Oh, these bees are really aggressive," and no, they're really just defensive. They're only trying to defend their hive. They're not going out to. They might be aggressive towards another hive that they're trying to rob honey from, but they're not going to be aggressive towards people. They'll really only be defensive towards people. Whereas when you get some of those, the more aggressive genes in there, you can get hives that are pretty bad. So when I breed hives, if a hive's nice and gentle, then that's the hive that I'm trying to build up, split from, make those hives be better.
Okay. Have you ever seen the movie My Girl?
No, I don't think so.
Movie in the 90s about Macaulay Culkin was in it, and he starred alongside another like young child actress.
Yeah.
And the whole movie is just them becoming friends, and then it's normal kind of like their parents don't want them to see each other. And then the big thing of the movie is that randomly out of nowhere, Macaulay Culkin gets stung to death by bees. It's a totally out of nowhere, don't know why that had to happen kind of thing.
Yeah. It's pretty rare. I think the number that I heard several years ago when I looked it up for mass envenomation, which is basically like you get stung to death, is like something like 10 stings per pound. For like every pound of body weight you have, it takes 10 stings. Now with allergies and things like that, there's other factors. I mean, there's people who you can get stung once and die, but and you can develop allergies to stings. So that's something that I watch out for very carefully. That's why I wear a full bee suit.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Every time, for the majority of the time. So I'm going out to the hives, because if I develop an allergy to stings, this whole business that I've spent my entire life building becomes a whole lot harder.
Right. So are you doing regular allergy tests where you're going and getting like those kind of little pricks in your back or whatever they do?
No, the allergy test is when I get stung. If my throat closes up, that's
pretty big trial and error there, dude.
I can't breathe. That's the allergy test.
That's a tough, yeah.
But I did actually do the full allergy testing before I started keeping bees as a kid, because when I was a really young child, I got stung by something and had a bad reaction. So we made sure I wasn't allergic to bees before starting beekeeping.
Yeah, that makes.
And my parents made me read a lot of books on it and stuff before I was able to start up my first hive.
Were they excited about it? Were they, when you kind of seemed like it was, as you got older, that this was going to really become your career? Or what do they think?
They probably were somewhat excited about it, but they, like, as a kid, you just want them to be like, yeah, like, sure, you can keep bees, and here's the bees, and here's the hive. Like, you kind of just want the thing that you want.
Sure.
And they had more of the approach of like, here's an encyclopedia of bees. We'll read this together if you're still interested, which is kind of a good way to do it because I was interested in so many different things as a kid. And,
Yeah.
you know, we went through one book on it and then we were interested. So we went through another. And then for Christmas, they gave me like a bee suit. And then I was able to start one hive at the same historic site and then do that successfully. And I sold the honey and I was able to buy another hive. And it was actually several years before we actually kept bees at my parents' house. I started it at that historic site so that I could kind of have a place for her. They were worried about the neighbors and, you know, things like that. So
Okay. Makes sense.
So I want to show you this. This lady, she's like pretty big on TikTok.
the
She's
Texas bee lady.
Yeah, do you know her?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
If there's any, like, what you have to understand about the beekeeping world is like, if something's online about bees and it gets more than like 100 views, probably 10 people send it to me. So, but yeah, it's similar work to what I do with removing bees from walls.
Sorry.
I don't quite have the voice for TikTok or the flowing blonde hair.
It's true. She's hot.
Being hot certainly helps.
Yeah.
But
11 million followers. Holy
Yeah,
moly.
she got a lot.
yes, they're very, it's also hard for me to know how popular something is because like everybody will send me a beekeeping thing. So I'll just assume that everyone in the world knows about something, but it's just that everyone who's seen it sends it to me.
Yeah, so why does she get stung?
She's going total like raw dog for this, which is really.
So it's, why doesn't she get stung?
Yeah,
If you go slowly and carefully enough and use enough smoke, you can do that. She probably does get stung. I'd be very surprised if she'd never gotten stung.
Yeah.
What the bees are doing here is they're going in to follow that queen. So a lot of it, she's following the body language of the bees. And there's a couple of reasons that I do things a little differently. One of the main reasons that I use the full suit and when she does not is because I'm often teaching a second person. And if I don't mind going through a hive without a full suit on.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm not allergic. I know what it feels like to get stung. I'm not that worried about it. It's often I'd rather risk getting stung than being in a bee suit when it's 95 degrees out.
Yeah.
But I found that as soon as I don't wear a bee suit, especially on those hot days, the clients who are coming out, it's like, oh, I'll be fine too. It's like, well, but if you get stung, then like that's going to be a more negative experience. And so I do it as kind of like taking every precaution because I'm teaching. Yeah. If I'm just going through my own hives, my own backyard, I would even if I'm just going through one hive in a day, I'll go through and not wear the whole suit.
To get indoctrinated into this stuff, did you have to get stung? Because you know how like when police go through police academy, they have to get tased. Like, was that kind of like?
Oh yeah, like joining a gang. You got don't put up bees.
Kill somebody.
Joining the beekeeper gang.
Sure.
Yeah. It's a very it's kind of just naturally you'll get stung very quickly, especially when I started out. I think I had a smoker and a hive tool, which is a little pry bar used to go through the hive, and I did not have a good bee suit. I had those Tyvek painting suits.
Yeah, okay.
And
real makeshift.
If you get stung through that,
Real
the
Delco
stinger,
ingenuity there. I like that.
yeah, the stinger gets stuck in the Tyvek, and so every time you brush against it, you get a little half sting. So you get these little clusters of
It's like going through a sticker bush, and then you're like brushing your pants off, and you're getting like stuck with
and
them.
then the seams would rip, and so I'd have all these holes in it. And so I learned to do a lot of beekeeping without a bee suit where you have to use a lot more smoke in the hive. If you use like when I do removals, I don't use the smoker at all. When I'm removing bees from a wall, it tends to drive them further into the spaces. And Whereas when I'm working through a hive, I'll use a little bit of smoke, but I don't have to use as much because I still have the suit on. If a couple of bees get angry, I can still finish up what I'm doing there. And then the other thing is speed and efficiency. I need to, get through a lot of hives very quickly. It's nice to have the suit on. You don't have to worry about every single individual bee that might possibly want to sting you. You just have to kind of be going through the hives and go through. And a lot of people wear suits and then no gloves. And you want to have that dexterity when you're going through the hives. For me, I wear the full thing when I'm teaching just to have the best practices. And then for a lot of years, I didn't use any smoke. So then I used the full suit. So
I'm done.
I think.
Do you have anything else?
Any issues with Beyonce's fans getting confused with your industry, the beehive, and all? And it seems like they're going down a rough turn now too.
Yeah. So I actually have once over the summer, I had somebody call me. I just launched Google Ads for removing, doing removals and teaching beekeeping and stuff. And I had this lady call me, and she was very confused, and she was wondering why some cleaning service that was like, helper honeybees or something hadn't shown up. And I was like, I'm really sorry. I'm not that. So, but she's so old and confused. I was trying to I go on my phone and find her the right number and stuff.
Yeah.
I was like, it's definitely not the right number, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, where can people find you? What do you do, and how can you help people?
So I'm at elishoneybees.com. I do everything involving beekeeping. So if you're looking at learning honeybees, learning how to keep bees on your property, just having someone come and do the whole thing for you and give you custom labeled honey, or if you have bees in your walls, or if you want to buy honey, beeswax, candles, I do it all. If it involves honeybees, I either probably do it or can point you to somebody who can.
Perfect.
Nice. Well, hey man, thank you so much for
Yeah,
coming
this was
on.
great.
Thanks for having
Thank you
me.
very much. We
Learned a lot
appreciate
about
it.
bees.
Seriously, yeah, that was awesome.